thank you for coming along tonight on behalf of the Elements Academy. My name is Nicky Gilmore, and I'm a member of the Elements Academy. Well, I hope I am. I'm also chair of a small history group called the United Ulster History Forum. We do small displays as far back as the United Irishmen right up through to present day. Also a new member of the East End Great War Society. A few of the members come along tonight. And tonight the talk's going to be on King William III, or King Billy as he is known. Just before we like to go on, what the plan is, I would like to be breaking them down as such. I'd like to look at early Ireland and what I think personally that how things would have affected his eventual coming over to Ireland, to the Battle of the Boyne. And then I want to look at his life as such from when he was born. And all I'm going to do is basically throw out a few dates and a few headings and just fire them out there. Also, there's going to be obviously a couple of taboo subjects in among it. And the question is, do we really know who King Billy was? Do we know the true history? Was he this great saviour of the Protestant faith, or who was he? That's the big question. The first talk we had in Cultureland on Monday night past, and not too many turned up, but it was good for me to have a talk which was just really my first main talk. And we had Dr. Ian Allison, who was sitting alongside Liam Logan. And when I was saying something, I always watched Ian, and if Ian gave the nod, that meant I was right. And if Ian shook his head, it meant I was going the wrong way. So it helped me in bits and pieces that I had logged down as far as the talk goes. You know, history's a wonderful thing, and I think sometimes that basically when you look at something, especially history, and you take the two sides of it, you can understand it a whole lot better. Growing up in Portabogie, probably 99% Protestant village, when it came to the 12th time, it was King Billy appeared. He was on the arch, he was probably maybe painted on a wall, and didn't really know too much about him. So Liam had phoned me up about October, November time. He says, we're doing a series of talks. Dr. Ian's doing First World War, Dr. Rory's doing Presbyterians, United Irishmen, Irish language. Liam was doing Ulster Scots, and so on. And I thought, where do I fit in this? Like, I'm a plasterer. I just use history as a hobby, and yet I'm among these educated men, well, except for Liam now.
Thank you.
But it made me think, you know, did I know a whole lot about King Billy, other than that he came over to Ireland and fought in the Battle of the Boyne? Well, the answer to that was no. I really started panicking then, because I started to read into his life, and I was reading all that stuff, and I was going, my goodness, who was King Billy? But in Northern Ireland itself, as I said, history is a wonderful thing, and it's a passion of mine, it's a hobby. And when we get caught up sometimes in Northern Ireland, we get caught up with symbols and flags that we have at the minute with the protests going on. But similar to King Billy, do we know our history? Do we know the symbols, and why did it offend us? Well, basically, before I get into my talk, I want to just look briefly at the symbols or the flags. Do we know when a tricolour's flying, an Irish tricolour, do we know the true meaning of that tricolour? Well, when you study history and you break it down, it doesn't seem so offensive then. Well, the green that stands for the Gaelic and the Irish-speaking people of Ireland, the white is for the unity and the peace, and the orange, it's not gold, it's orange, is for the followers of William, or the Protestants of the Ireland itself. So it doesn't become so offensive then, because the flag itself was taken off the French Revolutionary flag. It's three parts, they're equal. The green isn't bigger than the orange, But the funny thing is, when I was down south working, plastering a house, the old guy told me he was in the Irish Army, and he says, funny enough, yeah, that's the true meaning of the flag. He says, but when the Irish soldiers fold the flag up, they always fold the green first, the white on top of the green, and then the orange to separate the green and the orange, because they've been fighting for hundreds of years. But in the same phrase, we look at the Union flag. The flag that seems to be taken down, causing offence or whatever. What does that flag mean? How do we approach that flag? It's the same as history. You have to approach it with an open mind. The flag simply, don't get caught up in colours. Okay, we use the red, white and blue in so-called silly season, 12th of July, 12th fortnight. Through my childhood, curbs would have been painted red, white and blue colours. But that Union flag, which broke down, is basically three crosses. It's the cross of St George, the white background and the red cross. The cross of St Andrew, which is the Scottish cross, that's where we get the blue from. And the cross of St Patrick, which is the patron saint of Ireland. So why does that offend so much? History is the same. Learn your history. Get your children the knowledge of history on the island that we live on. And this would really bring me in to the talk tonight on King Valley. King William III, or King William II of Scotland as he was known. In 1541 to 1542 in Ireland, Tudor conquest of the Ireland would include English law, which would basically lead to decades of negotiations, wars and treaties. 1594 to 1603, monarchs of England and Ireland would apply the penal laws. To me, these laws would be the big chain reaction, if you like, of events that would happen within the next 100 years or more. Penal laws, what were these penal laws that would cause so much bother? Well, it basically says, I've written it down here, penal laws were a series of laws imposed in an attempt to force Irish Roman Catholics and Protestant Presbyterians to accept a Christian faith, a defined Christian faith by the Anglican Church. So, in a nutshell, if you were basically, later on, what happened was, if you were a Presbyterian and you didn't go under the hood of the Anglican Church, or you were Roman Catholic, vice versa, the Presbyterians, if you were married in that church, and it didn't go under the cover of the Anglican Church, your marriage would have been classed as void, the same as your children would have been probably classed as illegitimate. So you can see a spark flaring up here. 1607 was the flight of the Earls, and basically setting the scene then for the plantation of Ulster. Plantation, again, is usually talked about much on the Ulster Scots scene. And again, the knowledge from Ian had told me, or Ian and Liam basically, that the planters were not all Protestants. If you look to this side here, you'll see the fine specimen of a Catholic planter, Mr. Liam Logan. Maybe we should have shut the gate when that time was to come, keep him out, we don't know. But anyway, that was the plantation of Ulster, setting the scene for it. Also, there was laws brought in. Roman Catholics were not to hold public office. Church fines for non-attenders, and so on. Taxes or grace was put in place by Charles I, and this basically led up to the first big rebellion of that century, 1641 rebellion. Again, each of these here have talks on their own. You could talk easily on each of these here if you studied them, but I'm just skipping through them. The 1641 rebellion also led to Confederate Ireland, which led to Cromwell coming over. 1649 to 53, Cromwell was sent to put down the 1641 rebellion. With this, we had 1652 Settlement Acts, Roman Catholics were barred from Irish Parliament, Ventures Act, and also confiscation of land. So basically, the likes of my friend Garth at the back there, if he had his third generation of his land after the Cromwellians had come over, and the soldiers were going to stay, they basically took his land. So again, this is another domino effect that would spark rows, that would lead to wars, etc. This basically brings us into our main man tonight, if you like. His father, William II, was stadholder of the House of Orange, or the head of state, basically. He was married to Mary Stuart, Princess Royal. Mary was the eldest daughter of King Charles. She was the sister of Charles II and the sister of James. Obviously, they were expecting a child. Catastrophe strikes. 8 days before the birth of the baby, William II dies of smallpox. With this, the whole head of state, the provincial states, they had pretty much cancelled this title, if you like. William is then born 8 days later, as we know, on the 4th of November 1650. You would expect Mary, his mother, to basically be the executive of the will, to have the say over her newborn child. Pretty much basic stuff like, what will we call this child? I will call my child whatever. But it wasn't to be. His grandmother had stepped in, Amelia, and Mary then had said her child, she wanted her child to be called Charles. Amelia had stepped in. She had looked to see what would be, basically, what way her grandson would follow. She would want her grandson to follow in the footsteps of her son. So it came about, as we now know, that the baby was called William after his father. So he's William III. It's said that Mary then, for long periods of time, would distance herself from Dutch society. Also leaving the child, William, up to long periods of time, should be away from. We've got to remember also that Charles I had been beheaded. Previous to this, her husband had died. It said, leading up to the birth of the child, her bedchamber would be changed to black for the morning. Probably just too much for the lady. She's mentioned again as she's brought in 1660 with Amelia, which they tried to convince several provincial states to designate William as their future stadholder. So basically what they were doing was they were looking for the future of their son stroke grandson. They wanted him to fulfill his father's shoes. They needed him to do that. He was born into this right. Pretty much in the early years, it's much of education, schooling, and how William would be brought up. But what nice thing that struck me when I was reading, it's very important when you studying something, unless you have the knowledge of Dr. Ian himself, that you take it from more than one. Like you just can't look up the internet and go, yeah, that's okay, I'll write that down. What you have to do is you look at different perspectives, different books, different people have their own views on certain things. So when I left the book on the Orange Order and see about maybe King William, I had to lift another book and see what it said in it, and then go to somewhere else, i.e. the internet. But it said that he was to be taught that he was predestined to become an instrument of divine providence, fulfilling the historical destiny of the House of Orange. Plain and simple, he was to fill his father's shoes. That's what he was being brought into. That's what he was going to be polished up for. When this was going on in the early years, 1652 to 54, we had a series of wars starting called the Anglo-Dutch Wars. In 1665 to 67, we had the Second Anglo-Dutch War. What were these wars? Why were they so effective? Well, these Dutch wars, Anglo-Dutch wars, were a series of wars fought between the English, later the British, and the Dutch. It was pretty much bragging rights for the trade routes. We've got to remember that in those days, you just didn't hop on a plane and go and make a deal in a big executive office. There had to be deals done, there had to be routes travelled, and these trade routes would make countries empires, if you like. These battles would have been fought on the sea. North Sea, English Channel, Norway, Italy, Netherlands, which resulted in pretty much Dutch domination of world trade until 1713. We see the next big thing in 1668. William's supporters tried again to enhance this prestige, to the effect of what I see as his first step of what he was being brought into, what he was being polished up to be. And it was the States of Sealand receiving him as first noble. Next of all, I'm going to bring a man in here, a man called Johann de Witt. It was said he had a part in William's education as such, but this man seemed to hold high office. He seemed to be right in there, always about, in command. He seemed to be nearly the main man of that day, as far as non-royalty goes. But he also wanted to keep the prince down and remain sort of as high up as he could, or the authority that he had. But it is said that he would prefer to ignore him, the prince, but the rise of office of Supreme Army Commander was implicit, and William would become a member of the Radvan State, or the Council of State, on the 31st of May 1670, with full voting powers. William's on a roll now. He's starting really to get in. He's starting to put himself out there. And he asked permission in 1670 to go over to visit Charles II. Charles II was probably classed as the Hugh Hefner of his time, maybe a few mistresses and whatever. But a debt had been run up from England to the House of Orange on a debt of 2,797,859 guilder. So William had got permission to head to England. He was granted permission to head to England to speak to Charles of this debt, but pretty much realised when he got there that Charles couldn't afford to pay him back, coming away, reducing the debt to 1,800,000 guilder. That's really the early 70s. 1672 was classed as a disaster year. Again, we had the Third Anglo-Dutch War, which we talked about. There will be one more after that. But the Franco-Dutch War, in which the Netherlands were invaded by France under Louis XIV. Louis again is another man that seems to be big in this era. He wants to be the main man of Europe. William withdrew remnants of his field army on the 14th of June into Holland. But the presence of such a large army, the French army, that were able to invade, it really it put pressure on the ordinary people, because they seen how easy it was. And the people then It says it caused general panic to the people, who later turned on this man, Johan de Witt. The 4th of July, the States of Holland appoint William stadholder, and he took the oath 5 days later. 7th of July, the French army was effectively blocked, and on the 16th of July, Zeeland offered the stadholder right to William. Johan de Witt comes in again. He's unable to function as Grand Pensionary after an attempt on his life. This whole invasion thing has put pressure on de Witt. To me, this next section is where William really starts to be crafty. He starts to use his head, he's being as crafty as he could be. On the 15th of August, William published a letter from King Charles II in which it stated that the war was made because of the aggression of the De Witt faction. Now, Johan was later murdered by the Orangist civil militia in The Hague on the 20th of August. William had been rumoured to have something to do with the murder of Johan de Witt and his brother Cornelius. What did he do? Now, this is why I say he was crafty. He published a letter, and then basically, when the public put the pressure on, he seemed to wash his hands, but the main perpetrators he brought round the back door, if you like. They ended up having high office and some receiving money. And it's probably true what you say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. 1672, William again was on the move, threatening French lines at Maestricht. William continued to fight against the invaders from England and France, and later Charles would withdraw after the Anglo-French fleet was defeated for the 3rd time, leading to the Treaty of Westminster. 1677 sees a big year for William. He gets married to his first cousin, James's daughter, another Mary Stuart. James not really happy about this. Charles, maybe having his own ideas of what he might get out of it, persuades James to go ahead and let his daughter marry William. And William had probably his idea of what he would get out of it as well. This man again pops up, 1678. Louis XIV wanted peace with the Dutch Republic. Now, why would Louis be such a threat? I mean, why would he want to be part of Europe? Why would he want to be kingship or have kingship over the whole of Europe? Well, we have had many people like this over the years, dictators, over different wars. But with this constant battle between William and him, it says that both remain suspicious of each other. William had said that Louis had wanted universal kingship over Europe, but yet Louis would class William as a warmonger. In 1685, with the surge of refugees, Huguenots to the Republic, William would join various anti-French alliances, such as the Association League. This included the Holy Roman Empire, Sweden, Spain, and several German states. 1685, James II succeeded Charles, which left William he was very wary of what way James would go. He watched until 87, when he thought James would join the League of Augsburg, but later he wouldn't join any French alliance. So this was really making William's mind up of what way James was going to go. By now James was King of England. He was granting religious liberties as the Roman Catholic faith. To me, King was not using his head. Now, this is my own personal view, and I'm probably looking for Ian's nod on this. He, instead of being maybe crafty and bringing the liberties in, putting people in office to do with maybe religious liberties, he went against the main men, if you like, the bishops, Parliament, who took a disliking to him. It is said that when the bishops opposed what James was doing, let's go back to what we started off with the Anglican Church. James was going against the Anglican Church, he was going against the bishops. The bishops ended up in the Tower. It is said that when they got out of the Tower, they were known as the Immortal Seven. This, to me, was the start of James's downfall. He was going against Parliament, he was going against the Church, but he thought because he was king, he can do what he wants. From this, Parliament would nearly send William an open invitation to come and invade England. And so he did. William would land at Brixton in southwest England on the 5th of November 1688. He would come ashore from the ship Brill, and he would have approximately 11,000 foot and 4,000 horse soldiers. Most of the Protestant officers in the army and most of the noblemen would pretty much open this invasion, open arms. They would grant this invasion, they would allow this invasion to happen without any rebellion at all as such. But let's remember that not only was the Protestants, the officers of the army, happy that he was here, but most of the ordinary folk, including Roman Catholics, were happy too. When James seen this, that things were going against him, he tried to flee to France. And of all people, was caught by fishermen, who later brought him back to London. Again, I can see, and again my own personal view, of William using his head again. William brought him back, he imprisoned him, but why did he not just behead him? Why did he just not keep him out of the way? Like many kings had done before, many important people, just get rid of him and let it be done. But he never. He used his head. If William had beheaded James and basically got him out of the way, because he was pushing this Roman Catholic faith back into play, it would have made James a martyr for the Roman Catholic faith. And this is not what William would have wanted. It says that William was also tolerant to the Roman Catholic faith, so he didn't want to do this. 1689, the Commons made William accept a Bill of Rights. On the 13th of February 1689, Parliament passed a Declaration of Right in which it deemed that James attempting to flee would pretty much give up the throne. Also, William again would use his head with Parliament. It is said that because Mary had the bloodline to the throne of England, that if something would happen to Mary before William would die, that basically William would not be king, and he wouldn't accept this. A bit of bargaining was done, and they passed it that if Mary had died before William, that William would still remain king. So it was, and then 11th of April 1689, by the Bishop of London, Henry Compton, William and Mary were crowned King and Queen of England, but not Scotland. Scotland was were still really clinging on to the garments of James, although he had fled to France. But a month later, nearly to the day, the 11th of May, they were crowned King and Queen of Scotland. And as I said at the start, he's known as William III of the House of Orange, William III, King of England and Ireland, but William II of Scotland. This is when Ireland really comes into play again. Ireland was controlled by Roman Catholics, loyal to James, if you like, hanging on to the strings, and Franco-Irish Jacobites arrived from France in March 1689 to contest Protestant resistance at the Siege of Derry. This Siege of Derry is classed as one of the longest sieges in British military history, lasting approximately 105 days. We know that William then later sent his navy, which would break the boom and relieve the siege. This is another stepping stone then that would lead to the main battle on which we remember, the Orange Orders remember on July as the Battle of the Boyne. June 1690, William would land a portion of his army on the shores of Belfast Lough on an artificial island called Donald's Island. He would land then at 14th of June, he would land or step ashore, if you like, at Carrickfergus. He would then ride on through to Belfast. He would stay at Lisburn, and it's also said, in Hillsborough, it's also said that he was to camp in below a Spanish chestnut tree as they trained, or their last training session before the Battle of the Boyne. 1st of July, roughly 36,000 strong troops for the Williamites and 25,000 for the Irish and French. The main action took place at Oldbridge, the Battle of the Boyne, where the bulk of Williamite army crossed the Boyne. Williamites wore green in their hats, and the Jacobites would have wore white to distinguish one from another. It was also said that the day before the big battle, if you like, that the Jacobites, a few Jacobites had really been on the other side of the Boyne and had spotted what they thought was William, which supposedly was William on his horse with a couple of men around him. They fired a shot, they seen William falling off his horse. They thought they had killed William. Now you can imagine them going back into the Jacobite camp and spreading the gossip that pretty much just killed William here. The war's over, don't panic, their leader's gone. But the next day he was able to ride into battle, so you can imagine then the opposite reaction when the Jacobites would have seen William riding into battle on his horse. William again was in the thick of it. He was always there in the battle, and it is said that he nearly lost his life again with his own troops, the Enniskillens to be precise, not recognising him. It is said that when William told him, he says, "Of the Enniskillens I have heard much of you. You shall be my guards, now let me see something of you." And it said that the Enniskillens had stayed with him throughout the battle. My outtake again of the battle would rely on experienced men, which the Jacobites didn't seem to have. I think if you have a strong leader, it would travel through the ranks. You would have confidence in the battle. You would have confidence in your victory. But we know what James was like. He was rash. He was when he took over as king, he was going to be a bully, if you like, and pushing these liberties onto people. But my view, with inexperienced men of the Jacobites started to fall apart. The Jacobite cavalry from Oldbridge retreated, riding right through their ranks, which would cause probably mayhem and panic through their own men. This later led to the defeat of the Jacobite army. James, their leader, who they wanted to be king, would flee. He'd be one of the first to go. He would get on his horse and, as they say, get out of town. And what a sight if you were standing willing to give your life for this man you wanted to be king, who was trying to do, you thought, so much for your liberties, and there he was riding straight by you and leaving you behind. Your confidence would just drop. An estimation of around 1,000 Jacobites and 500 Williamites would lose their life in that battle of the Boyne. There were battles later on in Ireland with Cork, the siege of Cork, which lasted from the 24th to the 29th of September 1690, the siege of Limerick. But the decisive battle itself would probably be the Battle of Aughrim, which was fought on the 12th of July 1691 near the village of Aughrim in County Galway. That pretty much summed up the Williamite Wars in Ireland. But we've got to remember that Scotland has to come into play yet. Jacobites were strong in Scotland too, and many risings or rebellions would strike up and later be put down. William again uses his head. We've talked about the wit and how he would organise, how he would publish this document and what charge had done or said, which would turn against the wit, which would lead to his murder. But yet he took his allies, he brought them round the back, he gave them high office and money. Well, the same's about to happen again. With the Jacobites in Scotland, basically what would happen was when the rebellions were put down, William would give them an option. Sign the oath of allegiance to me, recognising me as King of Scotland, or pretty much be punished. Those who would sign it would be well looked after. Those who didn't sign it would be punished by William's government, which led to the massacre of Glencoe. Public demand again, with the Jacobites learning and knowing of this massacre, they would use it against William as propaganda. Look what your king has done. How could he be king if he's massacring his own people? Again, William would bow down to the public. He would dismiss those who were involved. It is said that he was meant to countersign the document that would allow the massacre to go ahead. But also, again, this would happen. He would dismiss those who were involved, but at the same time, he'd be looking after them. Again, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. After that, it really goes back to London and Parliament. Parliamentary elections 1690 began to favour the Tories. William would dissolve the Parliament again 1695, and a new one that year was led by the Whigs. Again, assassination. There was always the fear of assassination. Assassination plot was for William with a man called, the ringleader called John Fenwick, who was later beheaded in 1697. So there was always that fear of a rising from the Jacobites, from no matter how small a group or how large a group, it was always there. The war in Europe would still go on with France. William was supposedly away for long periods of time, it is said from spring to autumn time, which would leave his wife to rule under nearly his command. Says they worked well together. But again, catastrophe strikes in 1694 when his wife dies, the same as his father with smallpox. It says William was left devastated. We talked about, we started to talk of these so-called taboos, if you like, of William. Maybe people don't want to talk about them, maybe they don't want to discuss them. And one of the first ones, which there is two, would be that William was allegedly a homosexual. Again, the Jacobites jumped in this like a day's work. They would put out pamphlets. Again, look at your king, look who he is, look what he's done. William would later dismiss these suggestions that he ever was. This, to me, is the main taboo in the country that we live in. This bit that I'm going to tell you about now, maybe a lot of people don't want to hear. It says that two historians had claimed that Innocent XI, who became Pope in 1676, gave substantial amount of money to William. Why would a Pope want to give King Billy, as he's known here, money? Now, I struggled with this at the start. I read it. I've wrote it down as I read it nearly. I thought about it. And it was coming to me gradually until our dry run, if you like, on Monday night, when Ian had said the whole thing straight in my eyes what I was reading. You see, when we mentioned Louis was wanting kingship over Europe. We had the Jesuits, who Louis was allying himself with, who, if I'm right in saying, Ian wanted a Pope in Avignon. The Vatican wanted the Pope to remain there. They wanted one Pope. So why would the Pope not want Louis out of the way? He was going to use his money to help William defeat Louis. And who was stringing on to Louis's coattails, if you like, but James. So with this money that supposedly went to William would help the crusade of William defeat James and defeat Louis. To me, this would make sense. Your ally, who maybe would be the top of a different faith, but yet it is seen to be, it is said, the sum of 150,000 scudi, the equivalent to £3.5 million in today's money, was sent over for William. Now, I'm only taking this the way I read it, my perspective on it, and maybe what Ian says. If I get the nod, that means yes. It is later said that the Vatican did not like the way James was aggressively putting his liberties on the people, the way he was pushing the Roman Catholic faith forward. It said that they didn't look kindly in that. He's also too close to Louis XIV, who was wanting to be the head of Europe, the king of all Europe. So why would the Pope not want to get them certain figures out of the way to keep things to the way they want it to be, the normality as they seen it? It is said that William was later to repay the loan, offered to repay the loan, and by this stage Innocent had passed on, had died. The Vatican didn't want the whole glorious revolution to be centred around the Pope and William. So basically the whole thing was later forgot about. Take of that what you may, orange men or non-orange men. Does it make sense on what the Pope was doing? Of course it was. He was getting what he was wanting. He was becoming a strong ally in the Protestant camp to try and push Louis out, who was allies with the Jesuits. And again, Ian had said, make sure you say the Jesuits of the time, because we cannot tar the same people with the same brush throughout different decades. In 1702, William III, William II of Scotland, died of pneumonia. Now, I don't know if a lot of people knows this. I mean, you would think of William being in the thick of it, being in the wars in Europe, being the Battle of the Boyne, so on. Maybe he would have died from a gunshot wound, maybe he would have died from dagger wound, maybe he would have been cut with a sword. No. He fell off his horse. His horse stumbled on a mole hill or a mole burrow. It said he came down, he broke his collarbone, which led to complications, which led to pneumonia, which led to the death of King Billy. Now, this is the funny bit, the Jacobites again jumped on the propaganda bandwagon. It is said they toasted the little gentleman in the black velvet waistcoat for the death of King Billy. They couldn't do it, but the little gentleman in the velvet waistcoat could. It is later said in a book that Winston Churchill had stated that that fall opened the door to a troop of lurking foes. William is buried in Westminster Abbey alongside his wife, and that basically was the end of King Billy. To sum King Billy up, was he clever? I think he was clever. I think he was smart on the way he was managing his business, if you like, of being king, of being head of state of the House of Orange, of being a leader when he would go into battle. Learning the things I have, and there's much, much more on King Billy we could go into. There's much, much more on the early Ireland that we could go into, but we won't tonight. Knowing the things here that I've learned with his battles, with him being tolerant, he wasn't just coming into England, he wasn't saying, I'm a Calvinist, I'm a Protestant, I'm now king, you basically will do as you're told, I'm not tolerating you. He was tolerant to the Roman Catholic faith. It is said that also that the Ulster Catholics would fight for him later on in Europe. They would fight for him in the Battle of Offram. So he had to be tolerant. He was using his own devices. He was being smart to win his own battles. Should it be personal? Should it be military? This would give me confidence if I was standing beside William to go into battle. So, at the end of the talk, I would like to thank you all very much for coming along tonight. I've babbled away through it. I'm sure there's a lot more I could have said or should have said about William. I hope I've got the gist of who he was over to you, and the lead up from Ireland to his birth to his death. And again, I don't see Ian shaking his head, so I think I've maybe done okay. And I'd like to thank you all very much for coming